What's the one question Elon Musk never thought he'd be asked on stage? It didn't come from a scientist. It didn't come from a reporter. It came from a child. And his answer? Well, it wasn't about rockets, technology, or Mars. It was about something much, much deeper. Do you believe in God? The words cut through the auditorium like a blade. The buzzing of whispers, the clicking of pens, the tapping of keyboards, all of it froze instantly. Hundreds of eyes turned, not toward Elon Musk, but toward the tiny figure standing in the front row. It was a little girl, no older than 8 or 9. Her hair was tied neatly in braids, her pink dress slightly wrinkled from sitting too long. She held the microphone with both hands, as if it were too heavy for her small fingers. Her voice had trembled, but her eyes were steady, locked onto Musk with a seriousness far beyond her years. Musk, the billionaire inventor, the man who built rockets and electric cars, who dreamed of Mars and artificial intelligence, was suddenly caught off guard. He had answered questions from world leaders, professors, and engineers. He had sparred with journalists, critics, and skeptics. But this was different. This wasn't about science. This wasn't about business. This was about faith. The audience leaned forward, holding its breath. Some people smirked, expecting Musk to brush the question aside with a quick joke. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. A few even seemed annoyed, as if such a personal question had no place in a discussion about science and technology. But Musk didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her. He simply stared back, his expression unreadable. For nearly half a minute, he said nothing. The silence grew so heavy that even the sound of the rain against the auditorium's windows seemed loud. Finally, Musk raised the microphone. His voice, usually sharp and quick, came out slower this time, almost careful. "That's a very big question," he said. The girl blinked, waiting. She wasn't nervous anymore. In fact, she seemed calmer than the hundreds of adults in the room. Musk tilted his head, almost studying her. "You know," he continued, "people usually ask me about rockets, Mars, or AI. They want numbers, timelines, predictions. But you," he paused, "you've just asked me the hardest question of all." The hall murmured softly, but no one dared laugh or interrupt. Musk wasn't smiling. His tone was serious, heavier than anyone expected. "When I was your age," he said, "I also wondered about God. I grew up reading books about science and philosophy, searching for answers. I wanted proof. I wanted equations. I wanted evidence." He looked down at the floor for a moment, then back at the girl. "But belief isn't like launching a rocket. It's not a formula. It's something else." Musk began pacing slowly across the stage. His hands, usually moving with restless energy, were now clasped together behind his back. "Science can tell us how stars are born, how galaxies move, how planets form. But when you stand outside on a quiet night and you see the sky filled with billions of stars, science doesn't explain the feeling you get inside." He stopped pacing, pointing upward, as if the ceiling were the night sky itself. "That feeling, that awe, that wonder, that's where people see God. Not in equations, but in the spaces science hasn't filled yet." The girl's lips parted slightly, her eyes shining with curiosity. Musk's voice grew softer. "I can't tell you exactly what God is, or if anyone truly knows. But I can tell you this. Every time I failed, every time a rocket exploded, every time the world doubted me, I felt something. Something that whispered, 'Keep going.' Something that reminded me I wasn't alone." He walked back toward the girl, lowering his microphone so his voice carried directly to her. "Maybe that's God. Maybe it's hope. Maybe it's the universe reminding us that we matter." By now, the little girl's grip on the microphone had loosened. She wasn't trembling anymore. Instead, her eyes glistened with tears she was trying not to let fall. Musk knelt slightly so he could meet her at eye level. His tone was gentle now, almost fatherly. "Believing in God doesn't always mean having answers," he said. "It means having questions. It means having hope. And it means never giving up on searching for something greater than yourself. Just like you asked me tonight. You've reminded everyone here that some questions are bigger than rockets, bigger than Mars, bigger than technology." The girl's lips trembled, and finally, a single tear rolled down her cheek. The audience, moved beyond words, erupted into applause, not for Musk, but for the courage of a little girl who dared to ask the biggest question of all. Musk smiled faintly, his voice nearly lost in the roar of clapping hands. "Never stop asking big questions," he whispered to her. And with that, the moment was sealed forever, not in equations, not in blueprints, but in hearts. For a long moment, Musk said nothing. The little girl's words echoed inside his head, louder than the hundreds of people watching him. Around him, the packed auditorium waited. Professors shifted in their seats. Students leaned forward. Parents whispered to each other. Some expected him to laugh it off. Others thought he'd give a quick, logical answer, maybe even brush it aside as a child's innocent curiosity. But Musk didn't look at them. He didn't look at the flashing cameras or the rows of adults waiting for a soundbite. He looked only at the little girl. Her hands were small, clutching the microphone as if it might slip away. Her shoes dangled off the stage chair, not quite reaching the ground. But her eyes were steady, filled with the kind of sincerity that no adult in the room could match. Finally, Musk leaned forward, his voice quieter than usual, softer. "That's a very big question," he said. "And sometimes the biggest questions in life come from the smallest voices." The girl's eyes widened. She wasn't expecting him to take her so seriously. The hall fell silent again, not from confusion, but from anticipation. Everyone knew Elon Musk as the man of rockets, of electric cars, of Mars. He was someone who answered everything with numbers, logic, and science. But this time was different. Musk rubbed his hands together slowly, his gaze still locked on the little girl. "When people ask me about rockets," he began, "I can tell them how much fuel is needed, how heavy the engines are, how fast we have to go to escape Earth's gravity. When they ask me about Mars, I can talk about radiation, soil samples, oxygen levels. When they ask me about AI, I can explain how machines learn and why we must be careful." He paused. The audience hung on every word. "But when someone asks me about God," he exhaled, "that's not an equation. That's not a formula. That's something science can't measure." Musk's voice grew softer, almost reflective. "When I was your age," he said, still speaking to the girl, "I used to sit outside at night and stare at the stars. I wanted to know what was out there. I read books about the universe, about philosophy, about life. I wanted answers, proof, something solid, something I could hold on to." The girl tilted her head, listening intently. "But I didn't find proof. Not the kind you can put in a lab or write in a textbook." Musk continued. "What I found was wonder. Wonder that we exist at all. Wonder that we can look up and ask, who made all this? Or why are we here?" He smiled faintly, almost sadly. "Science can tell us how stars are born, but it can't explain why looking at them makes you feel something in your chest. It can tell us how a brain works, but it can't explain why love feels so powerful or why hope keeps us going." The little girl blinked, her eyes glistening. Musk began pacing slowly, his hands behind his back. The hall remained silent except for his footsteps on the wooden stage. "I've had failures," he admitted. "Rockets have exploded. Factories have shut down. There were times when people laughed at me, told me it was impossible. And honestly, there were nights I almost believed them." He stopped pacing and looked at the girl again. "But in those moments, I felt something I couldn't explain. A voice inside, maybe. A push. A whisper telling me to keep going. Some people call that faith. Some people call it God. Some people call it hope." He knelt down now, lowering himself closer to her level. The cameras clicked furiously, but Musk seemed not to notice. His attention was only on her. "Maybe God isn't about proof," he said gently. "Maybe God is about the things that give us strength when everything else fails. The courage to keep building. The hope that tomorrow can be better. The love that makes life worth living." The girl's lip trembled. A tear rolled down her cheek, glistening in the bright auditorium lights. The audience erupted into applause, but Musk didn't stand immediately. He stayed kneeling beside the girl, lowering his microphone slightly, so only she could hear. "You asked the hardest question tonight," he whispered, "and that makes you braver than most adults I know. Don't ever stop asking big questions. Don't ever stop searching for answers. That's how the world moves forward." The girl nodded slowly, wiping her tear. She smiled faintly, her innocence shining through again. Only then did Musk stand, turning back to the crowd. But the mood in the room had shifted. The event had been about technology, rockets, and the future. Yet the moment people remembered most wasn't about Mars or AI. It was about a child daring to ask the question no one else had, and a billionaire daring to answer it with honesty, humility, and heart. Long after the event ended, whispers followed. Some debated his words. Some dismissed them. But for those who were there, and for the little girl especially, that night would never be forgotten. Because for once, Elon Musk didn't just talk about machines or space. He talked about something deeper, something bigger, something beyond rockets, beyond science, beyond the stars. And maybe that, in its own way, was proof of God. Musk began to pace slowly across the stage, his hands clasped behind his back. The spotlight followed him, while the rest of the auditorium sat in heavy silence. I spend my life building rockets, cars, and machines that I hope will make the future better, he said, his voice steady, echoing in the vast room. I believe in science, because science shows us how things work. But when it comes to questions like yours, questions about God, that's not something you can measure with a calculator or test in a lab. No one in the audience moved. Professors leaned forward, students clutched their notebooks, parents whispered nothing at all. The atmosphere was tense, like the air before a storm. The billionaire, usually known for his quick wit and bold statements, was not rushing through this answer. He wasn't making jokes, and he wasn't dodging the question. He was taking his time, and that made every single person pay attention. Musk stopped pacing and turned back toward the girl. His expression softened. When I was your age, I also asked myself the same thing, he said. I wanted proof, like a scientist. I wanted a formula, a clear answer written in black and white. The girl's small eyes blinked at him, her tiny hands still wrapped around the microphone. She hadn't expected her question to be taken so seriously, but now she couldn't look away. Musk's voice grew quieter, almost reflective. But as I grew older, I realized something. Some answers aren't about proof. They're about belief. They're about the feeling you get when you look at the stars, or when you hold someone you love, or when you realize how small we are in this giant universe. A hush spread over the crowd. The audience, many of them people who had built their lives on data, facts, and equations, were listening to something beyond numbers now. The little girl's eyes began to water. She wasn't crying from sadness, but from the weight of his words, from the strange new feeling that maybe the question she had asked really mattered. Musk stepped closer to the front of the stage. You know, he said, I've seen rockets explode. I've seen companies fail. I've faced moments where it felt like everything was falling apart. And in those moments, science didn't always give me comfort. Numbers didn't always make me feel stronger. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the room before returning to the girl. But something else did. A whisper, a spark, a belief that even if I couldn't see the whole path, I had to keep going. Some people call that God. Some people call it faith. Some people just call it hope. The audience sat frozen. Even the cameramen capturing the event had lowered their equipment slightly, as if the words themselves deserved to be heard without distraction. Musk's tone shifted again, becoming almost gentle. Hope is powerful. It's what makes people dream. It's what sends rockets to Mars. It's what keeps humanity moving forward when everything feels impossible. He moved toward the edge of the stage and knelt slightly, lowering himself closer to the girl's level. The bright stage lights shone over them both, highlighting the intensity of the moment. You asked me if I believe in God, he said softly. I can't give you proof. I can't hand you an answer the way I hand someone a design for a rocket. But I can tell you this. When you feel that spark of wonder, when you feel love so strong it hurts, when you look at the stars and feel both small and infinite at the same time, maybe that's where God is. The little girl's lip trembled, and a single tear slid down her cheek. She quickly tried to wipe it away, embarrassed, but Musk smiled faintly, reassuring her with a nod. Don't ever think your question is too big, he added, because the biggest questions are the ones that shape the future. And sometimes, a child's question has more power than 1,000 scientists. The hall erupted in applause, but it wasn't the loud, casual clapping of a routine speech. It was slow, thoughtful, heartfelt. Some even stood to their feet. But Musk remained still, his focus only on the girl. When the applause finally quieted, Musk rose to his full height, but stayed near the edge of the stage. His final words echoed softly. The truth is, I don't know the full answer. Maybe none of us do. But I believe there's something bigger than us out there. Something that gave us the ability to dream, to imagine, to ask questions like the one you just asked. The girl sniffled quietly, but her eyes were shining now. She smiled, a small, innocent smile that seemed to carry more weight than the clapping crowd. Musk looked at her one last time. Never stop asking big questions, he said, because that's how we'll find our way, not just to Mars, but to understanding ourselves, and maybe even God. The audience exploded into applause again, this time thunderous, unstoppable. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes, and people whispered about how they had just witnessed something unforgettable. But for the little girl, the moment was not about headlines or applause. It was about being seen, about knowing her question mattered, and about receiving an answer that touched her heart in a way she would carry forever. And for Musk, it was a reminder that not every challenge was about rockets or machines. Some were about faith, some were about hope, and some were about the courage of a child brave enough to ask the one question that no formula could ever solve. The auditorium was buzzing with energy. Hundreds of students, professors, and journalists had gathered to hear Elon Musk speak. People expected to hear about rockets, Mars colonization, artificial intelligence, and the future of humanity. Musk was a man of science, a man of logic, someone who answered difficult questions with facts and numbers. But then a small voice cut through the air. Do you believe in God? The room went silent. Everyone turned to see where the question had come from. In the front row, clutching a microphone with trembling hands, stood a little girl no older than 8 or 9. Her big eyes looked up at Musk with a mixture of nervousness and innocence. She had no idea her simple question had just stunned an entire hall. For a long moment, Musk didn't answer. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking. He simply looked at her, as though the weight of her question was heavier than anything else he'd been asked in his life. Finally, Musk spoke, his voice quieter than usual. That's a very big question, he said. And sometimes, the biggest questions come from the smallest voices. The girl's lips curved into a shy smile, but her grip on the microphone tightened. She wanted to know the truth. Musk began to pace slowly across the stage, his hands clasped behind his back. The cameras followed him. You see, I spent most of my life building rockets, cars, machines. I believe in science, because science shows us how things work. But when it comes to questions like yours, questions about God, well, that's not something you can measure with a calculator or test in a lab. The crowd leaned forward, hanging on every word. They were used to hearing Musk talk about physics and engineering. This was something different, something personal. Musk turned back toward the girl. His voice softened. When I was your age, I asked myself the same thing. I wanted proof, like a scientist does. Equations, data, something solid I could hold on to. He paused, his eyes drifting upward as if remembering. But as I grew older, I realized that not every answer in life comes with proof. Some answers are about belief, about the feeling you get when you look at the stars, or when you hold someone you love, or when you realize how small we are in this giant universe. The little girl's eyes began to shine. She hadn't expected him to take her so seriously. She hadn't expected an answer that sounded more like wisdom than logic. The audience sat completely still. Professors who had spent decades in science, students who had memorized formulas, parents who had heard countless lectures. All of them were listening like children again, waiting for the next words. Musk's voice grew more emotional, breaking from his usual robotic tone. I don't know if anyone can say for certain what God is, he admitted, but I believe there is something greater than us, something that gave us the ability to dream, to imagine, to ask questions like the one you just asked. He slowly walked closer to the edge of the stage, then knelt down so he could speak directly to her. The cameras in the room clicked rapidly, capturing the moment. You see, young lady, he said gently, Believing in God doesn't always mean having all the answers. Sometimes it means having hope. Hope that tomorrow can be better than today. Hope that even when things feel impossible, someone, or something, is watching over us. And hope is powerful. Hope is what sends rockets to Mars. It's what helps people keep going when life feels too heavy. The little girl's lips trembled, and suddenly a tear rolled down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of his words. Musk reached out and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Never stop asking big questions," he told her, "because questions like yours are what keep humanity moving forward." The hall erupted in applause, but it wasn't the usual clapping for a technical explanation or a clever joke. It was softer, warmer, filled with respect. Some people even stood to their feet, moved in a way they hadn't expected. The girl wiped her tears, but her smile returned. She sat down slowly, holding onto his words as though they were a gift she would keep forever. Musk straightened up, his expression thoughtful. "The truth is," he added, looking back at the audience, "I don't know the full answer. Maybe none of us do. But I think that's the point. Maybe we're not supposed to know everything. Maybe we're supposed to search, to dream, to wonder." His voice softened again. "And maybe, just maybe, that search itself is a kind of faith." The applause grew louder, cameras flashed, and people whispered that they had witnessed something unforgettable. But in that crowded hall, it wasn't about headlines or sound bites. It was about one child, one question, and one answer that touched the human heart more deeply than data ever could. For Musk, it was a reminder that even in a world driven by science, there's room for wonder. And for the little girl, it was the moment she realized that sometimes the most powerful answers don't come from equations. They come from hope. And that night, in that auditorium, everyone left carrying the same quiet thought. Sometimes the smallest voices ask the biggest questions. The audience erupted into applause, but Elon Musk didn't stand up right away. He stayed kneeling beside the little girl, his hand still resting gently on her shoulder. The cameras flashed, the hall vibrated with clapping. Yet in that moment, nothing else seemed to exist. It was just Musk, the girl, and the question that had silenced a room full of some of the brightest minds in the world. The little girl wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her lips trembling as she tried to smile. And when Musk saw that small, fragile smile break through her tears, he smiled back. A rare, genuine smile. Not the sharp grin people saw in interviews or at product launches, but the kind of smile that came from something deep within. That single moment, more than the rockets, more than the cars, more than the headlines, was unforgettable for everyone who witnessed it. For the little girl, it was life-changing. She hadn't just gotten an answer to her question. She had been seen. She had been taken seriously. She had been told that her curiosity mattered just as much as a professor's or an engineer's. She didn't just get words. She got permission. Permission to wonder. Permission to hope. Permission to believe that the questions inside her heart were worth asking, even if the answers didn't come with equations or proof. As she sat back in her chair, clutching the microphone like it was a treasure, she felt lighter, stronger, like she had unlocked something within herself. And the audience, they felt it too. Professors who had spent their lives teaching science looked at each other with damp eyes. Students who had come expecting a lecture on space left with something much bigger. Even the journalists in the back, trained to chase headlines, sat quietly for a moment, realizing that they had just witnessed something they couldn't reduce to a soundbite. And for Elon Musk himself, it was more than just a question. It was a reminder that no matter how far technology goes, no matter how many planets we reach or how powerful artificial intelligence becomes, the biggest questions of all will never come from a lab, a rocket, or a boardroom. They will always come from the human heart. As he stood up slowly, his eyes swept across the room. For once, he wasn't thinking about investors, deadlines, or the weight of impossible projects. He was thinking about something far simpler, yet infinitely more important, the wonder of a child. It reminded him that all the science in the world, all the data and algorithms, are only tools. Tools to serve humanity. Tools to make life better. Tools to give children, like the one standing before him, a future worth living for. And maybe, in a way, That was its own kind of faith. The lights began to dim, signaling the end of the event. People rose from their seats, murmuring excitedly about rockets, artificial intelligence, and the colonization of Mars. But beneath the noise, there was another whisper traveling through the crowd. It wasn't about Tesla or SpaceX. It was about a little girl, standing bravely with a microphone, asking one of the most powerful men in the world a question most adults were too afraid to ask. Do you believe in God? And it was about the answer, a thoughtful, heartfelt reply that touched not only her, but everyone in that room. As people filed out into the night air, many replayed the moment in their minds. Some whispered to each other about hope. Others thought about their own childhood questions, the ones they'd buried under work and routine. A few even admitted quietly to themselves that maybe, just maybe, they had been reminded of something they had long forgotten. Later, when the news reported on the event, most headlines focused on technology, the future of rockets, AI, and innovation. But for those who had been there in person, that wasn't the story they carried home. The story they carried was about a child's courage and a billionaire's vulnerability. About how, in a world obsessed with facts and figures, a simple question about God could stop time and reveal something far greater than science. Because in the end, that's the kind of answer humanity needs the most. Not an equation, not a formula, but a reminder of hope, of wonder, of belief in something bigger than ourselves. And so, the legend of that night was not about inventions or technology. It was about the moment when Elon Musk, the man known for sending rockets into space, was brought down to Earth by the smallest voice in the room and gave an answer that brought her, and many others, to tears. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We share more powerful stories that inspire, move, and make you think. Your support helps us keep going.